Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. Right, I'm joined today by my regular co-host, Jay Carson. Hi, Jay. How you doing today?
Good, Mike. How are you? It's morning in America, Mike.
Well,
I'm doing great.
This is our delayed version of the show because there was so much to take in. And I mean, the big thing, obviously, is that it looks like Republicans are going to get their massive tax cut now that the Senate has joined the House in passing tax cut legislation. And of course, there's still a House-Senate conference to get through. But at this point, it seems very, very likely that for better or worse, Republicans are going to have their first major legislative win of the Trump presidency. And, I thought, Jay, that what we could do is sort of go through sort of the deals that were made and kind of the last minute finagling, at least the high points, so to speak, of it. And then we could kind of get into our deeper thoughts, our analysis of is this good or bad and that sort of thing, if that works for you.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, there were a number of last minute sort of Republican Senate holdouts, and there was a lot of the dealing kind of was, designed to take care of those people. For instance, Lisa Murkowski got the Alaska National Wildlife Reserve opened up to oil and gas drilling, which has been on her wish list for quite a while. And it's obviously something that a lot of environmentalists are very upset about. Jeff Flake from Arizona got a promise that the Senate leadership would try to work out some sort of immigration deal that would protect young undocumented immigrants. Susan Collins, who I sort of hope might be a no vote, saved the state and local tax exemption at least up to $10,000 and also got a promise of action to shore up those Obamacare exchange markets. And then finally, Steve Daines of Montana and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin both wanted more benefits for pass-through businesses, and they were accommodated too. Although to do that, they needed to adjust the bill to take away a few corporate benefits, which were mainly related to the corporate alternative minimum tax, which originally was going to be eliminated entirely, which the Senate instead kept, but just kind of weakened considerably. Now, there's one name I notably didn't mention, and that was Tennessee's Bob Corker, who didn't buy into the belief that the bill would be revenue neutral. And so Corker asked for a trigger mechanism to be included that would essentially automatically raise taxes when those revenue neutral claims were proven false, which I think is highly likely. But
we'll see.
Well, yeah, we certainly will, for better or worse. But then the Senate parliamentarians said, well, we can't do that. And then Corker asked for some of those cuts to be rolled back over time to reduce the negative effect on the debt. And his colleagues weren't willing to give him that because, hey, they already had enough votes. So they were good without Bob Corker. And so I think that pretty much takes us to how we got to 51 Republican votes. Would you say, Jay?
Yeah, pretty much. Although I would say, I think it's significant that Thursday afternoon or around lunchtime, John McCain signaled that he would vote for the bill, and the Dow Jones Industrial Rate rose by 330 points. I think that's not insignificant. So,
yeah, absolutely. This is certainly good for Wall Street and big business. And the question to me is it good for real Americans? And I think you and I are going to have very different answers about that.
All right, yeah.
So, there are though some important differences between the House bill and the Senate bill. For instance, one real obvious thing, and I don't think this is going to be a problem in conference, is the Senate bill repeals the Affordable Care Act individual mandate, and the House bill preserves it. And I think that that's going to go away. I don't think the House Republicans are going to have any problem agreeing to that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not so much the House bill preserves it. The House bill didn't touch it in the first place, but yeah.
Right. They didn't want to get into that, but the Senate did. And so now there are a few differences on individual tax cuts. For instance, in the Senate bill, the individual tax cuts expire at the end of 2025, but in the House bill, those are permanent. Now, that's going to be a little tougher to deal with because the Senate is required under those reconciliation rules that it be budget neutral after 10 years. So I think the House is going to have to give a little bit on that.
Yeah, my sense is the House probably will, because that's one of those let's call it largely symbolic giveaways to say, okay, they're going to expire, because what will happen is there would be tremendous political pressure on whoever's in office to renew those tax cuts.
Yeah, which is interesting in that if we
assume essentially, the way the bill, or any Congress can undo what a former Congress has done. Except in regards to CFPB, but we'll talk about it later. So it's all of these things are the tax cuts are permanent, unless and until we change our mind. So
yeah, well, that's interesting, because in terms of costing this out, of course, the figures that have been used in the analysis, and which basically come to say that over a decade it'll cost $1 trillion or so, roughly, will be more in debt. Though that doesn't include this longer term assumption that these tax cuts will just be extended, which would mean if there are no corresponding spending decreases, it's actually going to cost more, considerably more than what's been, what Republicans are saying. But that's a little bit of trickery to kind of make it seem like it's less expensive than it really is. And another reason why I'm very disappointed.
We're doing this to satisfy the Byrd rule. So I mean, then that rule sets a 10-year look forward view. I mean, it's sort of arbitrary, but that's what it is. So.
Well, Byrd rule aside, there was a day back in the dim, dark past, the good old days, when there were Republicans who actually cared about deficits. But apparently that day is long gone.
Oh, I think I'll make the case that they still do. But as we move forward.
Okay. Another difference is the estate tax. The House bill eliminates it entirely, and the Senate bill limits it but doesn't repeal it entirely. Any sense, Jay, on how you think that's going to work out?
I think the House would be okay going with the Senate version on this. There's a nice symbolic benefit you get in saying we're repealing the death tax entirely and so forth. But realistically, is it going to make that much of a difference? No, because the extent to which the Senate has allowed greater. I'm losing my words today. I usually have the best words.
You do have good words, Jay. Yes,
just not this morning. Sort of the standard deduction, if you will, for the estate tax before it starts to kick in. That's raised to such a level that for most of your average American families, they're not going to be looking at dealing with it, and those that are over that limit are going to have the means and sophistication to do some workarounds.
Yeah,
so
right now it's at 5.5 million,
500,
and and the Senate bill would raise it up to 11 million. So yeah, that doesn't affect hardly anyone, basically. Another difference, an important difference, I think, is
I shouldn't say hardly anyone, but.
Yeah, hardly anyone, actually. I will say that. It's a very tiny percentage. But anyway, the child tax credit. Now, in the House bill, well, I should say currently, it's $1,000 per child. The House bill would increase it to $1,600, but the Senate bill would, in part at the urgings of Senators Marco Rubio and Mike Lee, would raise that up to $2,000 per child. Now, that's a change that I actually support, and I hope that makes its way into the final version of that. Do you think it has a chance, Jay?
I think if the real, I would say, true philosophical conservative would look at that and say, let's get rid of it. I mean, if the goal is to reduce and simplify, adding in one other tax credit like this and then increasing it is probably not helpful. I don't know that the child tax credit, if you're looking at it from an economic development standpoint, does that much in terms of injecting new revenue into the economy. But there it is. I think the Senate or I think the House version's better, but I think that's something that both sides could probably live with end of the day. So I think it's a toss up as to which version ends up in there, but it's also sort of a, is it going to make a huge difference? No.
Well. To me, that
I mean,
represents
it's a couple
where you.
$100 obviously per child, and also there's a phase out, I think, and as to when you can claim it. But
Well, I think to me that represents another one of these areas where you and I have a fundamental disagreement about tax policy, and you're part of what's sometimes derisively called, I think, the trickle down school, in that tax cuts that. Go ahead.
But keep in mind, I'm arguing against interest. I mean, you do not have any children, and I have
I do
three, so
not.
I would be a bigger beneficiary of that, of
Certainly.
government largesse, who's paying me just to reproduce.
You're
And
still
I'm not sure
wrong,
why
but
why is it
yes, you're.
why is it fair that I should get a tax credit because I chose to have children and you did not?
Well, yeah, and I would not actually structure, in a perfect world, I wouldn't structure this child tax credit in the way it is. I wouldn't give you it. I wouldn't give you the credit because you don't need it. I would. I mean, no, seriously. You have
Just because.
No, it's just because I don't like you, Jay. Yeah, no. I mean, I would structure it based on household income or some other measure where it goes far more to the
Sure,
people
and there
who
is
need
more.
it
There
most.
is a phase out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, moving on, the mortgage interest deduction. Now, in the House version, it actually goes down, but it only allows up to $500,000, the mortgage interest deduction. Now, most people still would be able to take advantage of that because right now it's
Right. Most people don't owe $500,000 of interest
yeah.
on their house.
And the Senate bill basically just keeps it the way it is. And this is something that the home builders lobby and the realtors lobby have been really, really upset about. I think that this is a deduction that I actually like the House version here a little bit better, because I think the tax code should not encourage people to buy bigger and more expensive houses that they can't necessarily afford. So I actually think that the House version is a little bit better here, and I hope that stays.
I'm with you on that.
It's nice that we could agree on something in this tax bill.
Yeah.
I think there are a few other actual areas of agreement. There are some differences in the tax brackets as well. The top tax rate in the House version is 39.6%.
Plus, there's
Senate,
that bubble rate that you can have in the House version too.
Right. And the Senate version, the top rate's a little lower, 38.5%. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out, but that isn't a huge difference, I don't really think. In fact,
well, I would say, again, that's where I'm a little bit, it's hard to say, I think ambivalent as to what the real true conservative position ought to be, because the House version also has the more flattening effect, the fewer brackets, which I think is beneficial. But it's got the kind of kicker top rate. The Senate, on the other hand, still has the various bumps, but doesn't have that. So to me, it's a little bit of a toss up. If you're asking me my personal opinion, I think we're still better. Fewer brackets, more flattening. But
in terms of the cost projections, the House proposal is expected to cost on individual tax brackets. The change is supposed to cost $1.09 trillion. The Senate version $1.17 trillion. So that's reasonably close, I would say. So I see what you're saying in terms of toss up. And then finally, the corporate tax rate. Right, the House version has it at 20% starting in 2018. The Senate version, 20% starting in 2019, I believe. And so, what do you think about the corporate tax changes? Do you think there's going to be any?
I think first of all, it's that's the most important piece of this entire piece of legislation, is changing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%. I've made the point of, and we'll argue about this later about the costs of the bill, but I think there's a substantial cost to doing nothing that isn't factored in any of these analyses. And that is, if you continue to have this corporate tax rate that is out of whack with the rest of the civilized world, we're going to continue to lose companies, employers, corporations, sort of hoarding cash offshore. And if this bill had failed, I think that would have accelerated quickly, and it would have been a bad situation. So overall, I say I think that's fantastic. That's 20%. Trump wanted 15. But okay, Ireland's still at 12 and a half or whatever it is. That's fine. But 20% puts us back in the game. And there are also some substantial incentives for companies to repatriate the almost $2 trillion that's sitting offshore. So I think that's good. My preference would be sooner rather than later. Just because if you delay it to 2019, that's one more year where the companies just sort of keep this money offshore as opposed to bringing it in. So I think the quicker it kicks in, the better.
Well, and this is one area where you and I don't really disagree a whole lot. I guess one thing I take issue with is this idea that corporations are suffering because of this. Now, the effective tax rate is considerably lower than the listed corporate tax rate, and we've seen years of now record corporate earnings, and they have all kinds of cash, not just stashed in other countries, but in here in the United States. And so this where corporations are suffering so much, I think is largely or is certainly overstated, but that being said, I think
it's not a question of whether they're suffering or not. I mean,
the idea that it's the idea that they're not competitive internationally under the current tax regime. I just think that's just simply that's a difficult. Well, at least it's again being overstated by conservatives. But that being said, I think there is a lot to be said for lowering the actual corporate tax rate and cutting out a lot of the loopholes and so forth. And so. And again, that's something that plenty of Democrats have been saying for a while too, and that I think could have been the basis of something that might have had something approaching bipartisan support. But of course, that's not the way that congressional Republicans decided to go with this. But in any case, I mostly agree with you on that, Jay. I think that's a good change. I should say that, of course, that we talked a little bit about cost, and that cockeyed optimist Mitch McConnell, so well known for being such a happy-go-lucky guy, he still insists that the bill will not only be revenue neutral, but has come out and said that it will actually increase revenue. And the Trump administration agrees with this, of course. And in fact, prior to the vote, Treasury said that it would provide actual evidence to back that up, evidence that would apparently be strong enough to overcome the conclusion of not just every liberal and nonpartisan economic analysis, but also every right of center analysis that the bill would increase the deficit. And here's a shock. They never provided any such evidence. To me, this is pretty clear. This is something that's going to, blow up the debt by at least $1 trillion, even under dynamic scoring models, and probably a little bit more if those, tax cuts are extended. So, Jay, I know you wanted to make a slightly different case for that.
Let's talk about this. First of all, I stand on my prior remarks about there was a cost to doing nothing. That would likely have increased our deficit and our debt that we are avoiding by doing this. The other piece to look at is the numbers we've been using. The Congressional Budget Office has assumed that the economy will average 1.9% growth for the next 10 years. That is historically low. The historic average is closer to 3%. That is, in fact, more or less the growth we've had this year. It may be, depending on the last quarter, we may have in excess of 3% growth. CBO is also typically, notoriously, and almost always, wrong in terms of these predictions. And it's always sort of in the same direction. It's sort of when there's a Democrat president, there are tremendous predictions of growth. They believed, for example, that the CBO predictions when during the Obama presidency and the passing the stimulus was that the economy would grow by 3.4%. Oops, I'm sorry, I misread that.
That's okay.
That's 3.4% is the average since World War II. But for example,
let me just stop you there before you get into that example. I should point out that idea of the average since World War II. We're talking about two very different economic areas. I mean, the era from 1945 to roughly the late 70s was an entirely different economic world for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, I think, for instance, an era of much higher economic growth for, again, a lot of reasons. And for those who are interested in exploring that a little more, I would highly recommend Bob Gordon's book, The Rise and Fall of American Economic Growth. Tyler Cowen has written a book called The Great Stagnation, which kind of is similar on the same ones. But the point being is that what a lot of economists have concluded, Tyler Cowen, Robert Gordon, Larry Summers, that we're in a different era since really the early 80s, and those kind of projections of growth, the growth we saw from the end of World War II through the late 1970s. A lot of times people put the break point at the oil shocks of 73. That really was an unusual period, and actually the growth that we can reasonably expect is more along the lines of 1.5%, 2%. And I would argue that's when we're projecting these things, when we're projecting growth rates and worried about deficits, what we want to do is we want to err on the side of caution. We don't want to say, well, let's just assume everything works out hunky-dory, and so, well, let's make that our projection. I think that's fundamentally irresponsible.
Okay, and yet the economy has grown to 3% this year. So I mean, my point is, it's sort of the I refute you thus.
But except you're not. I mean, it's like the people who are saying, well, it was cold today, and so that must mean there's no global climate change or something like that. I mean, that's not I don't think that's a refutation. I would say that just the combined weight of almost every analysis, including, for instance, the Tax Foundation. The Tax Foundation is a right-wing organization, very friendly to dynamic scoring and these overly optimistic, projections of economic growth. Even they say that the Senate bill would cost $516 billion. And that's about the most right-wing analysis you're going to find. So over $500 billion from them. And here's the thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that the corporate tax cuts, that's one side of it, right? And I think that those cuts are actually you can make a good defensible case for that. But the individual cuts, that I think is just fairly indefensible. They didn't need to do that. I think they were clearly doing it because they wanted to take care of their wealthy donor class, and they did that. And yay for them, I guess. But that part of it is, I think, just taking care of your special interest groups and not really taking care of the economy and just saying, well, you know what, we'll just let future Congresses figure out how to deal with this. And that, I think, is just fundamentally, like I said, irresponsible and wrong.
Okay, well, so here's the numbers I was looking for. And this is the CBO projections that after the recession ended. This is in mid-2009. They predicted a economic growth of between 3.4% and 4.2% for the years 2010 to 2013. So again, this is the same CBO who we were saying now is so much so conservative and modest in expectations, then was saying this unattainable 3.4 to 4.2% during those years. Now, of course, the actual rate grew at about 1.9% of the 2% that we had. But here's something to consider, though. What if they're off? Now, here again, the CBO was off by 1.1, at least 1.5 to 2%. In 2010. This is not that long ago. If they're off by only a little bit and the economy grows by 2.6%, so if they're off by 0.7, one half of the error that they had last time, there's no deficits. If the economy within the next 10 years, if the economy grows at 3% for only 3 of those years, and all the rest are closer to the 1.9. Again, there's no deficit increase. So I'm taking this looking at historically. And one last one. When President Reagan proposed tax cuts, he based his estimates on zero deficit, that the tax cuts would generate 4.4% growth within 5 years. And he was widely lampooned for that. It was called the rosy scenario. And if you look at the initial year, it was bad. But if you look from 1983 to 88, the Reagan tax cuts, of course, coming in 86, the actual growth was 4.42%, meaning the rosy scenario even underestimated how it would perform. Now, you can say 1986, 88 was a different era, but I think you have to look at some history in this, and the fact that CBO and all of these analyses are fallible. They're human, and if you look at the broader picture, they tend to be wrong towards one way. And even if they are wrong, the other thing we're talking about is increasing the deficit by $1 trillion over 10 years. In which federal revenues will be roughly $47 trillion. So, increasing it by a very small percentage of what we're actually taking in, if that even happens. And regardless, I still stand by my first remarks that the cost of doing nothing is unacceptable.
Well, again, I'll just come back and say that I think you are trying very hard to cherry pick things and look at the most the most optimistic scenarios, and I think that's a fundamentally irresponsible way to make projections when you're dealing with when you're dealing with the federal budget. But I understand what you're saying, and you hope the economic growth is higher than I think it will be. And honestly, I hope you're right. It would be great if I were wrong here, and so many people on the left are wrong, and this unleashes economic growth 3.5%, 4%. That would be, who wouldn't want that? What sort of person wouldn't want? I'd be willing to eat crow and say, well, maybe so, but I just look at the weight of all these analyses, even from the right, that say that that's just not going to happen. And to me, hold on, let me finish. To me, that counts for more than, no offense, Jay, I love you, but more than your off the cuff, what I think are overly optimistic analysis. That's kind of where I come down on that.
Right. Well, again, I'm looking at the history, but let's do this. Let's set a check-in date that you and I we will agree to look at. Let's say, end of the fiscal year, end of the first half of let's say June 30 or something, on or about that show. We will both put in our growth predictions and see where we are then, and just sort of do a 6-month check-in.
Oh, I don't think 6 months would be enough. No, I think there's no seriously. I think there's enough of a lag for this sort of thing and so forth. I think that we really won't know until, say, 5 years from now.
Okay. Well, can I do a 6-month check-in?
Oh, sure. Of course you can. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Although
I know we're going long on this, but this is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to put in, we talked about the numbers and disputes about whose predictions are better and so forth. But this, on the purely philosophical, ideological, and sort of maybe the warm fuzzy thing, and it always bothers me that the Republicans probably don't do this enough. The whole idea that there's sort of the presumption when you look at it from this this increases the deficit, that this is all the government's money to begin with. And it's not.
Well, yeah, I really want to get to that. Before we do that, though, speaking of of deficits and that sort of thing, can we just take a quick break to pay our bills, or at least to thank our sponsor for today? I want to make sure we get that in. Okay, our sponsor for today actually is Brooklyn, and they've been a sponsor to us in the past. Now, Jay, I assume that you don't spend a lot of time thinking about sheets.
No, not a lot.
Me neither. Me neither, actually. But, sheets can make a big difference. And I've said in the past that I am a very picky person about sheets and other things as well. And I can say from personal experience, Brooklinen makes Great sheets, luxury quality without that typical luxury marked up price. And hey, if you're looking for a great gift idea, why not give someone something that they won't only use every night, but that can potentially make a real positive difference in how rested and energetic they are every day, right? And Jay, you have Brooklyn sheets too, right?
I do. I love them. And again, it's a little bit of a once you reach buying nice sheets. It makes you feel like a grown up. It's sort of you've arrived, and Brooklyn allows you to do that without the, I suppose, the typical arrival price.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love my Brooklyn sheets, and if you try them, I know Jay and we both know you'll love them too. And brooklinen.com has an exclusive offer just for Politics Guys listeners. Get $20 off and free shipping when you use promo code TPG at brooklinen.com. In fact, Brooklinen is so confident that you'll love your new sheets, they're giving you a risk-free 60-night satisfaction guarantee and a lifetime warranty on all their sheets and comforters. So there's no reason not to give these sheets a try for yourself or as a gift this holiday season. Give the gift of luxury sheets. Now, the only way to get $20 off and free shipping is to use promo code TPG at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com, promo code TPG. Brooklinen. These are the best sheets ever. Okay, Jay, I'm so glad you made that point about that fundamental thing, because that occurred to me actually today when I was getting ready for a show, and I thought, this is something I haven't heard much about from either side, and I do think this is incredibly important. This actually came out on our Facebook page, where a number of commenters on Facebook mentioned something along those lines, and I'm so glad you brought that up. So would you please kind of continue on that, because I definitely have something to say on that.
I feel like you're trying to bait me into something.
No,
here,
I'm honestly not. I swear I'm not.
No. I mean, look, the idea is when we say that, this will increase the deficit. Well, that sort of assumes that the government has a claim to X amount of everyone's money. That everyone's money essentially belongs to the government, and it's just up to them how they want to divvy it up. And obviously, I think that's inconsistent with the way most people think and live their lives. I mean, they earn their own money and they ought to be able to keep it. Yesterday was sort of a fun day in my hometown. Not to get all Garrison Killer on you, but it's sort of a winter festival thing that we have in my little suburb, and everyone goes shopping at the little downtown small businesses, and there's a parade and there's fireworks and Santa's there, and we turn on the lights. And I went to breakfast at a little family-run diner, and it occurred to me, these folks are going to have a much better year next year than they did this year, because of the changes. And mostly, in this case, I would say the second most important piece of the whole tax reform is the changes to pass-through entities, which are the small businesses, the Main Street type places, the mom and pop stores, that are now going to have more of a benefit. And to the extent that there's been this concern of we're losing our small towns, or big corporations are taking over. This is the kind of tax cut that is targeted and makes a lot of sense for these family run businesses. And for everyone out there of the liberals who are saying, shop small and so forth, which I completely agree with. Yeah, let's shop small, but let's let those people keep more of their money. And I think that's tremendous. And I think there is I'm surprised Republicans didn't push this more. That the way this tax is really in a lot of ways pretty, it tends to be more a tax on the wealthy, and it does give a lot of breaks to these LLCs, pass-through units that are small businesses. So that's my feeling on it. Is look, people view this as, hey, it's their money, they ought to be able to keep it. Now that the government makes commitments that it can't keep, then also the best way to start reining in spending is by turning off the faucet.
Yeah, well,
so again,
and that's one way to look at it. And I certainly understand and appreciate that. It's my money, and government's taking it. Another way to look at it, though, and I think this is where liberals, conservatives sometimes kind of talk past each other. Because I think another way to look at it is, well, not so much it's my money, government's taking it, which is based on, I would argue, a more kind of atomistic, individual-centered view of society. Another way to look at it, I think an equally viable way to look, reasonable way to look at it is what is my fair share of a contribution to the common good? And that's based on a more sort of communal, interconnected view of society, one in which, you remember back, Jay, President Obama at the time, that whole speech about how you didn't build this yourself, and that
Right. Yeah.
government and I think and certainly conservatives made fun of that and so forth. But the point here, I think, is a very good one. Is yes, we are individuals, and our individual rights and prerogatives need to be upheld. But we are also part of an interconnected society, and my success isn't due just to my own efforts, certainly maybe largely in some cases more or less, but we are part of a society. And
I help out a lot.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I believe that we, like a lot of liberals, I think, believe that we all have a duty to give a reasonable amount of fair share to promote the common good. And, then that's a very different way of looking at it. And I think that leads to different results. And I think sometimes when liberals don't understand the whole "it's my money" kind of viewpoint that government's taking, and when conservatives don't understand the contribute to the common good, that it's easy to just kind of get very angry and talk past each other on this. Like, it's not, it's certainly not to me that conservatives hate poor people and only care about themselves, and they're like a whole bunch of Ayn Rand sort of people. There are some people like that, and I think maybe they have issues, but in any case, that's a whole other story. But and that's I think the frustrating thing is that conservatives tend to focus on the individual freedom and liberty aspects of it economically and in other ways, whereas liberals tend to focus more on the communal aspects. And both of those things are viable. It's just that I think we don't come back to those sort of fundamental understandings and points of view probably enough, actually, in this, and just assume that the other side just wants to destroy the country, which I think is just ridiculous. I mean, there are a few people who maybe want to do that, but not too many.
No, I'm sure there always are. Look, there is. And again, as I hear you say that, I hear you're framing that argument about we're all in it together, and we ought to help each other out, and so forth, and that sounds good. But I'm also reminded there was another guy about 150, 160 some years ago who said something to the same effect, and that was from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, that didn't work out, and I think that's.
Well, I think that's a little unfair, but okay,
yeah. You know the guy I'm talking about.
But I think you're sort of creating a straw man there. No one, even Bernie Sanders, isn't calling for any sort of a Marxist sort of society.
Bernie Sanders loves that guy.
Obviously, there are a lot of gradations between what standard moderate liberals are calling for and communism. So, But anyway, yeah, I know
I understand, but I'm again pointing out the when we go down to the bedrock fundamental differences, I think sometimes that's what we end up talking about. It is sort of Adam Smith and Karl Marx. I mean, that's again, those are the poles, I suppose. But
and Adam Smith was a lot less sort of individualistic, atomistic than most people understand.
Sure, he was mostly talking about foreign trade and so forth, and bigger picture, macroeconomic. But
yeah, Adam Smith actually saw a much bigger role for government than most conservatives who tout him as being this completely laissez-faire person. Actually, would like to admit. But I think that's
still less so a role for government than Marx.
Well, certainly, yeah. But I think that's because a lot of people like to quote little snippets of Adam Smith, but who've never read actually Wealth of Nations or A Theory of Moral Sentiments. And I would encourage people to do that. They're both incredible, important documents. And I think a more nuanced understanding of Smith would suggest he's not exactly, again, an Ayn Rand kind of person, not at all. But kind of circling back to less theoretical stuff. I wanted to make this point. Let's assume, even if we assume that tax reform will ultimately pay for itself, again, I don't agree with that. The vast majority of economists on the left and the right said this won't happen. But let's just assume that, just for the sake of argument. I think we need to think about what that means. Now, I mean, in the most general sense, it means, of course, that tax cuts will create so much economic growth that even at lower rates, they're going to generate more revenue than had their rates remained where they are, right? But
yes.
Given that the vast majority of these cuts in the plan go to corporations and the 1%, they'll get the vast majority of the benefits. Now, some of this will, in fact, trickle down. But I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, especially on the left, that it's unlikely to be much more than a trickle. So even if this pays for itself, even if it meets what I believe to be the unrealistic growth projections of the most optimistic conservatives, it's almost certainly going to just make our income inequality problem worse. And we already have higher income inequality than at any point than just before the Great Depression. So that's another grounds on which I have a real problem with that. And I wanted to just put that out there.
Get that off your chest.
Yep. One other thing I wanted to point out.
I would recommend, let's do another. We'll also do this I'll do it at least at the 6-month check-in. See what the numbers are on real wage growth for the first 2 quarters of next year.
Well, again, I'm okay with that, but I think it's going to take a while for these to kind of.
You understand it may be an incomplete survey, but yeah.
Okay. One other thing I want to point out, sure, is, and I know we need to move on, but I wanted to point out my extraordinary disappointment with John McCain. Profound disappointment. I don't think is going too far. In voting down the Obamacare repeal in July, I think Senator McCain made at least at the time, what I hoped was a sincere plea for a return to the regular order. And I want to read a portion of his remarks to the Senate because I think it definitely applies here right now. Senator McCain said, "Our arcane rules and customs are deliberately intended to require broad cooperation to function well at all. The most revered members of this institution accepted the necessity of compromise in order to make incremental progress on solving America's problems and defend her from her adversaries. Let's trust each other. Let's return to the regular order." And of course, he said that then, and pretty clearly he just decided, the hell with that now. And I guess maybe I'm wrong to hold John McCain to a higher standard. I have a special place in my heart for John McCain. As you know, Jay, I was a big supporter of his run in 2000, and one of the only candidates I ever contributed to. I believed in John McCain, and so whenever something like this happens with him, it just sort of strikes it. It's really bothersome to me, and I'm so disappointed in John McCain. And I just wanted to point that out there. So shame on you, John McCain.
Well, so anyway. And if you go back and listen to those shows, I think I made the point he was being disingenuous then.
Yep. I was hoping you were wrong.
But
you did. You were right.
And again, people lambasted me as not being yeah.
Yeah, you were right. I was wrong. But I hoped against hope that John McCain was a better man than I thought he was. At least in this aspect, obviously he's a hero for other very important reasons. But in this aspect, his hypocrisy I just find deeply disheartening. So anyway, so in the end, I hope, like I said, for the sake of the country, that you're right and I'm wrong about this. I really do. I would love to come back on this show, say in 2 years, 3 years, and say, my God, Jay, this tax cut, that was the best thing. It was a great triumph, and I'm willing to admit it. That would be wonderful.
All right.
And I hope we're able to do that.
Make the date. Mark it in your calendar.
So we both hope you're right about this. But my more realistic hope is when all of this does start to fall apart, we're going to see a repeat on the national level of what we saw in Kansas when Republicans there put in place massive tax cuts that failed to meet their expectations. So my hope is that, my more realistic hope is that in January of 19, a House Democratic majority will get, and then in January 2021, a unified House, Senate under Democrat control, and President Kamala Harris will start to roll back some of this stuff. And from my lips to God's ears on that. So anyway, all right, Jay. Before we move on,
and the Irish will be toasting you. But go ahead, yeah.
All right, so before we move on to our next story, we want to thank our newest sustaining supporter, Dave, from Sheffield Lake, Ohio. And I believe that's right around your neck of the woods, isn't it, Jay?
That is. Wow. All right. Yes, it is.
There you go. Okay. And David writes, I love the thoughtful voice you, Jay, and Trey bring to politics. It's nice to hear more than just talking points. Being a progressive, I tend to disagree with Jay and Trey. Very good, David. But I thoroughly enjoy and appreciate that they put real thought into their arguments and the political discussion. Thanks for providing a great podcast. So thank you, David. Supportive listeners like David is what helps keep the Politics Guys going. And if you'd like to join him and help out the show, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. Also, we, in response to listener demand who said, whatever happened to the PayPal link, I put that back up there so you can contribute to PayPal as well. Jay, I think this might be a fitting point to make a major announcement about the future of the Politics Guys.
Major
if you're
announcement.
Okay with that.
Yes, very exciting.
Major announcement.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, here it is, folks. For almost a year now, we've been partnering with Audio Boom, the people who put us together with advertisers like, Brooklyn and Dollar Shave Club, Blue Apron, really all the companies whose products and services you've heard us promote on the show. But that's changing. We've decided that we don't want to be a vehicle for companies to sell razors or mattresses or coffee or anything, really.
Not that we don't like those products, because we do.
We absolutely do. We have never, in fact, there have been multiple occasions where Audio Booms come to me and said, will you guys promote this? And I said, no, we just can't do that. I don't believe in this thing. And so we've lost considerable revenue for that because we don't want to promote anything we don't really actually use and can say good things about legitimately. But anyway, we're not marketers. And to us, at least, you are not a market demographic to be sold to. That's not our thing. And again, not that we're casting aspersions on commercial podcasts, which, we still are. But I think to us, we found that ultimately it's not really the right fit for what we're trying to do and what we want to give you. And so when our contract with Audio Boom ends in early February, and we've had nothing but great experiences with them, but we've decided not to renew it. Instead, we're going to try to make a go of things through, listener and foundation support. Now, you may have noticed that over the past few weeks, there have been a lot fewer ads on the show. This started to happen shortly after we informed Audio Boom of our decision, which we had to do a few months in advance based on our contract with them. Now, we understand why they might now want to steer ads to a show that they won't be continuing a relationship with. That totally makes sense. But it's been a major financial hit to us. And as the weeks go by and as we gradually, or maybe not so gradually, become ad-free, that hit's going to be even bigger. And so, if you feel like what we're doing is worthwhile and you like this direction we're going to move into, we hope you'll consider becoming a financial supporter, either as a sustaining supporter by setting up a monthly contribution through Patreon or with a one-time contribution through PayPal, though PayPal also lets you set up recurring contributions as well. So Patreon we like for various administrative reasons, but really anything you can do to help out if you feel it's worthwhile, that would be great. This is going to be a difficult transition for us. It's going to mean a lot of work, but I think, Jay, right, you would agree that in the end, what we're going to come out the other end with is going to be an even better show for listener that provides even more.
I think so. And what we're looking to do is, we'll be in talks with partnering with some colleges and universities and some civic education foundations and those kind of organizations that would provide us with sort of some I hate to use this word, Mike. It's a horrible corporate word, but synergy.
Ooh, I was, yeah.
But no, I think places that share our objectives, and what we want to do is be sort of an essentially not just two guys arguing, but an educational outreach that we can spur conversation and help show how to talk about these issues without without getting into name calling and so forth, because we really believe that's something that is lacking in American discourse today, and it's something that we need to return to. And we think we can both agree. I think we get a better country at the end of the day if we do sit down and talk to our neighbors and we can have these kind of reasoned debates. So there are a lot of other folks out there who think the same way, and we're going to be working to partner with them to create something that's the podcast and bigger. So
yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of other things in the works than more than just the podcast. And because we, like you said, Jay, we feel this is an important thing, and we want to try to reach as many people and, do our little part to try to, promote civic discourse and understanding and so forth. Because, all ideological differences aside, I'd like to think that's something that we can all agree is an important common good. All right. Let's, I know we're already running kind of long, but my gosh, I think the other big story of the week, we certainly can't not talk about that, right? A major new development in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of ties between Russia and the Trump campaign. Ardent Trump supporter and former national security advisor for 24, 25 days. Yeah. Michael Flynn this week pled guilty. Yeah, he was there. He pled guilty to lying to the FBI. Now, it's not the crime he was charged with and pled guilty to that's the big deal. He's likely to get a minimal sentence for that. But it's the other more serious offenses he and potentially his son haven't been charged with in exchange for his cooperation with the investigators. Now, while we don't know who Michael Flynn might have compromising information on, he obviously made a strong enough case that he had something worth dealing with to get off so lightly. And some people, of course, are speculating that the next domino to fall could be his top Trump advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. I don't know. Jay, what do you make of this latest news in the Russian investigation?
I'm always one, and I'm one even on the tax thing. I said, look, we have to wait and see, and sometimes that's not a very satisfying answer for I guess a podcaster to just come out and say, oh, I don't know, let's wait and see what happens. But my sense is that the media is overblowing this to some extent, in that what Flynn lied about were having conversations with the Russian ambassador after the Trump election, which I would say are not most people would say are not illegal, and it's probably advisable and makes sense. I mean, I suppose someone can make the technical argument that it's a violation of the Logan Act, which we talk about every so often. Which was the 1799 prohibition on conducting
like a dead letter thing. Yeah, I mean, it's not really
and no one has ever been prosecuted under it. And Flynn's conduct in having an incoming administration reach out to ambassadors and so forth is certainly not without precedent. And it's hard to say. Talking about the Russians with, and essentially the message was, don't overreact to the sanctions, which you can agree whether that's a good message or bad message to send, but it's much different. To me, it doesn't point directly to any sort of re-election collusion. Now, again, there may be other evidence we don't know about, but from what we see right now, I'm not seeing anything that points to, and even so, I mean, the other piece is that someone instructed Flynn, presumably, Kushner or Trump, to send that message to the Russians. Again, well, okay, but there's nothing particularly improper or illegal about that.
Yeah,
again. So,
it seems to me, and we've heard this again and again and again, the old hoary cliche, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. I mean, that was, we heard that during the Clinton administration, now you could argue that the Iran-Contra thing actually was the crime and the cover up, but now you could argue it was, in fact. But the point being is that, it seems to be in so many of these instances that it's the obstruction of justice, the lying to investigators sort of thing, where people get themselves, that's where the real hole that they dig themselves, right?
Well, and the other thing let's consider is initially when Flynn had made these statements and was interviewed, this goes back to when Jim Comey was on the case. Comey said he didn't see it worthwhile in prosecuting Flynn. He thought it was just a matter of he misremembered when these conversations took place. And now Flynn is taking the hit, and I think largely to protect family members. I think that's probably the biggest part of this.
Sure.
So I'm my sense is I'm not seeing a huge story here, but we'll wait and see what Flynn says he knows.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have said from the beginning that while I understand my fellow liberals' desire to see Donald Trump removed from office, ultimately, the way I see this playing out is the most likely way I see this playing out is if things get too close, President Trump issues a few pardons here or there, and so maybe there's impeachment proceedings in the House if the Democrats get a majority, but I think that's as far as it gets, fortunately or not. Now, I know there are some people on the left who are calling for what they call the normalization of impeachment. Ezra Klein and Vox is really kind of pushing in this direction. I think that's a horrible idea for so many reasons. We could do a whole show on why I think that's an awful idea, I think. But in any case, I think if you're hoping that that's going to happen, number one, I think it's almost certainly not going to happen. And number two, I think we need to be real careful about removing a president from office who's been democratically elected for better or for worse. And so I don't think that's going to happen. And certainly, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I made that very clear. But I just, I'm very hesitant to go in that direction. I just don't think there's going to be enough there in any case for that. So, all right. Jay, I know we're running along, but I hope you'll bear with me. I just have to say something very quickly about a mention of my all-time favorite regulatory agency, CFPB. Who's in charge at the CFPB? This is a big story at the beginning of the week. It can't get overshadowed, right? There was that whole dueling directors controversy. It wasn't exactly resolved, but it looks like President Trump's pick, OMB Director Mick Mulvaney, he said that the CFPB was a sick, sad joke. It looks like he's going to prevail over Leandra English, who former director Rob Cordray named as the director basically as he was walking out the door, because English asked the federal judge for an emergency injunction, blocking Mulvaney from taking over. The judge, Timothy Kelly, a Trump appointee, denied that injunction. Jay, I'm guessing that you think that Judge Kelly got it right?
Oh, absolutely. And well, I think the other piece of it, well, he got it right on a couple points. One, and this is more a legal point that doesn't go to the broader thing, but in pursuing an injunction, one of the things that you have to show is that you will be irreparably harmed in the absence of that injunction. And I think that's usually the biggest piece of trying to get that injunction. That's the main factor they look at. The secondary factor, although again this varies from case to case, is the likelihood of success on the merits. I think English she really had nothing to say on the irreparable harm prong of this. And on the success on the merits, well, the CFPB's why do I always get? It's hard to say. That someone mentioned that's sort of the worst name.
Not for me so much because it rolls trippingly off my tongue.
Right, because you have it tattooed somewhere on your body.
Exactly.
I imagine. But no, even their general counsel said that Trump was likely to succeed on the merits. And this, to me, it was one of these sort of just goofy stories of someone standing up. No, I'm in charge here. And for a day or so, the New York Times and Washington Post kind of took it seriously, and then once everyone looked at it, like, well, not really. So it's a shame for Leandra, but
Yeah, and this hasn't been settled. Obviously, it still has to work its way through the system.
She can still pursue the rest of the case on its merits. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, what my initial hope was, that English would be right and that somebody who didn't hate the agency would be in charge of it. But I said, I need to be fair here and actually look at the Vacancies Reform Act and how it's been interpreted and the relevant section of Dodd-Frank. And honestly, I came down as much as I didn't want to in favor of the Trump administration here in Mick Mulvaney. The Vacancies Reform Act does not say that the president's ability to appoint is overridden by a subsequent statute. It just simply says that the president's power isn't exclusive when there's a specific statute.
And nor could it. I mean, I think there'd be a serious constitutional question about that. I mean, and again, if we could have a situation where agency directors appoint their superiors and they are not accountable to, you can't have someone appointed by the president and Congress simply refuses to confirm. I
might argue a little bit on that, especially with certain agencies that are designed for greater independence. But that aside, a second important point, I think, is that if you look at the language in Dodd-Frank, it says it permits the deputy director to act as director in the absence or unavailability of the director. Now, that's different than saying when the office is vacant. And the reason this matters, you might say, well, but that doesn't really matter. Well, when the office is vacant is actually specific language that Congress has used in the past when they intended a provision for an acting head of an agency to, take over when a previous head stepped down. And so maybe that's sloppy.
It's the difference. It's the difference between if Rich Corday's on vacation and can't be reached,
exactly.
And the deputy can take over, as opposed to I quit and there's no one as director.
Exactly. And to me, that was really the kind of the thing that kind of pulled me over to that side, is that if Congress has used more clear language in the past, drafted that, for that, and they didn't do it in this instance, well, I don't care what Barney Frank and Elizabeth Warren say the intent was. The language seems to indicate something different to me. And so while I don't think Leander English's claim is as groundless as the Trump administration claims it is, overall, I think the way that the evidence suggests to me that it's a weaker argument. So, maybe Barney Frank should have been clearer in the legislative language. I'd be more inclined to agree, but absence or unavailability does not mean the same thing to me as when the office is vacant. And I wish they would have written the statute differently and it would have been a little easier call for me, but they didn't. So there we go. And I really wanted to get that in because, what I noticed is that almost everyone on the left basically said, well, clearly Leander English is right. And almost everyone on the right said, well, clearly Mick Mulvaney. And oftentimes we do that, right? We start from what's our preferred outcome, and we'll just argue back from that and figure out. And I wanted to point out that, sometimes I think it's important to not to, maybe you start from there, certainly, but to try to be honest about it and try to look at both sides. And sometimes if you do that, you come to a conclusion that you may not like, but that, seems the most in accord with the facts and the logic and so forth. And this was not a conclusion I wanted to come to. But in this case, I unfortunately, I think that the Trump administration is right here. And I just wanted to point that out. So there we go. Yeah, well, I'll end that. I think we ought to end with that. And it reminds me of Justice Scalia, who is, again, would... or I think it was John Roberts too, or someone who said this: if you always reach the result that you think you want to, then you're probably not being a very good judge. So. Absolutely, and I totally agree with that. So, all right, well, that's it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We do hope you like what you heard, and that you will check out today's sponsor, Brooklyn, where Politics Guys listeners can get $20 off and free shipping by going to brooklinen.com and using promo code TPG. Listener support, more important to us now than ever. If you'd like to help us out, go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link to become a sustaining monthly supporter, or the PayPal link to make a one-time or regular contribution. If you want to support the show without spending anything, you can share this episode with your friends and followers, or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes, I can say it, also does help. And hey, if you want to reach us, mail at politicsguys.com or our Facebook page where we post stuff throughout the week, facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter at politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.